Data science has been becoming a growing profession and is also the heart of many organizations. That's why Data Science Portugal was born, the first community created by data scientists for data scientists. DSPT wants to gather anyone who works in the field and chat about any topic over this great subject. All members from our team are committed to make sure that the data science field evolves in a healthier and stronger way. To ensure that the focus is on sharing knowledge, we guarantee that our stage is not a place that supports any commercial or recruitment content, and our kind speakers are committed to share their experience for free. We want you. Let's do bigger things together. Join us at any event all around Portugal or online.
Hey everyone, my name is Isabel. I have Mafalda with me. Hey Mafalda.
Hi.
And we are going to be your hostess for today. So today it's the 91st webinar for the DSPT, and we have the following agenda. We have our opening as usual, then we're going to have our talk with Sam Hopkins, followed by a short Q&A, and then it's networking time. For the ones that do not know us, the DSPT is an informal community of data science enthusiasts, and our main purpose is sharing knowledge and experience. And for that, we have a philosophy of do's, in which we do promote knowledge sharing, we organize open events, but we also don't like having shameless promotion, and we like to guarantee the quality of all of our talks. And if you do have any idea, any project that you want to share with the community, do not forget to use our call for proposals link, in which you are eager to review and see what you can, if you can be our next speaker. Where can you find us? You can find us in Aveiro, Braga, Coimbra, Lisboa, Porto, and now online at datascienceportugal.com, in Meetup, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn, and on YouTube.
I want to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, because without you guys, most of this wouldn't be possible. And for the Q&A, please don't forget to post your questions on the YouTube chat. We will make sure everything gets answered. So regarding our speaker today, we are going to have Sam Hopkins with us. He is a partner and a co-founder of Data Engineer, and he is a co-founder and instructor of Lisbon Data Science Academy. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Hello.
And the stage is yours.
Okay, so I am presenting. All right, let's do this. All right, so today's talk is called MLOps equals more money. As you might guess from the title, this is about calculating and communicating the value of MLOps to non-technical stakeholders. So who am I? I'm Sam. I'm from the States. I like startups. I work with lots of clients, but startups tend to be my forte. I co-founded Dare Data Engineering, which is a consulting and outsourcing company specializing in data science and data engineering. I have a mostly technical background, and in the last few years, I have been spending more time transitioning into a coordinating and decision-making role. So the table of contents, a quick overview. We will first cover the motivation, context, and goal of the talk. We will then go over effective communication with non-technical decision makers. We'll talk about the types of costs that you incur without MLOps, and this point number 3 right here is the vast majority of the talk. And then lastly, we'll end up with the types of tech that you should advocate for. So part 1, the motivation, context, and goals of this talk. So let's set the scene. Before continuing, we need to know who is the audience for this talk. This talk is based upon a blog post, which is linked here, and you'll have access to it afterwards, that is meant to be read by a non-technical person. However, for this talk, we're going to take the perspective of you, the technical worker who is trying to communicate the return on investment in MLOps. So here is a hierarchy that can be found almost everywhere in an organization, where you've got a tech lead, some data scientists, some data engineers, And then somewhere above them, there's a non-technical person with budget. You, the audience, I'm assuming, are one of these people. You're a tech lead or a data scientist or a data engineer. You're the one that's doing the actual work. You've got your boots on the ground. You're the one that's experiencing the pains and the pleasure of everything that has to do with working in our field. And you need to convince this person of something technical, where this person is a non-technical boss with budget. They're your audience. So real quick overview to make sure we're on the same page. This talk assumes you're a technical worker, you're deploying ML models and or developing ETLs, you don't have proper automation around your production and dev environments, and there are non-technical stakeholders somewhere above you in the chain. And these non-technical stakeholders need to be convinced of an infrastructure overhaul in order to bring best practices to your work. Okay, so the goal of this talk is to give you, the technical worker, a framework that you can use to approach non-technical stakeholders with the value of MLOps. Which brings us to part 2, communication style with non-technical decision makers. So you always have to consider who is your audience. And in this particular case, we need to consider, why do they need to be convinced? Why do they not just say yes? Why do we need to actually put work into convincing these non-technical stakeholders? The reasons are many, but some of the most important ones are they are responsible for what's delivered at the end of the day. They don't have the technical expertise to make an informed decision themselves. They will rely on you to advise them. They have probably been burned in the past with an infrastructure overhaul that went way over budget. You know, whatever you're trying to convince them of, they're going to be thinking in their head, I've heard this before, I've seen this before, and it has left a bad taste in their mouth. And furthermore, they may not be seeing an emergency or anything else that would justify slowing progress on the current roadmap to invest in an overhaul. And let's be honest with ourselves, any investment in infrastructure overhaul is going to cause the current roadmap to take a bit of a hit. Okay, and most importantly, despite not knowing anything about the subject, they will be held responsible for it at the end of the day if something goes wrong, because heavy is the head that wears the crown. And this is a really, really uncomfortable position to be in. Furthermore, if they said yes to every single request for infrastructure changes that developers ask for, the organization would suffer. They probably get these kinds of requests all the time. And we, at the end of the day, we are technical workers. We have a very narrow perspective on the entire business compared to them. And the stakes are going to be much higher for them. Their decisions affect more people than yours do. So because of all this, convincing this person is a gigantic job. Okay? It should not be underestimated how difficult it is to convince this person of this thing. You should not be frustrated because, oh, you tried once and it didn't work. Well, if you try once to do something that's really hard and it didn't work, I mean, of course you should be prepared to try again or modify your approach. Okay? And if your explaining looks like this, where you are yelling technical terms, mansplaining things to this poor guy over here who just does not know how to interpret anything that you're saying, you've already lost. Okay? So in order to avoid that situation and generate some success, there's some general guidelines. Now, for those of you that already know this part of the talk is going to be completely useless. For those of you that don't know these, this part of the talk will be the most important part. Okay? So in your communication style, it requires a delicate balance between firmness. Okay? By firmness, I mean you have to believe in what you're saying. You can't back down on the first counter argument. You must show them respect, okay? And you must empathize with their position. You have to try and put yourself into their shoes. You must do this with a minimum, preferably 0, although that's usually not possible, technical language. Remember, They don't know all the acronyms. They don't know all the technical things that you know. So you have to translate it. Okay? You must communicate in terms of money. Every single thing that you do has a cost at some point. And if you can assign a cost to that one thing and then avoid the technical language around that thing, it will bring much more success, because business people understand money. So if you can frame your argument in terms of money, you increase your chances of success. Let's move into part 3 now, which is the vast majority of this talk, and is the types of costs incurred by not having proper MLOps. So let's talk in terms of costs for every single thing that we do, which would mean that as a first step, we should identify the different types of costs that are associated with developing and maintaining a production data ecosystem. Really quickly, let's go over them. I have 4 different categories. The first one is one-off costs. The second one is monthly costs, which have a few different subcategories. We have employee turnover costs, and we have time to market opportunity costs. So let's go through these one at a time, okay? So you have one-off costs, and these are essentially all costs involved with getting a project off the ground. There's not a lot you can do about these. They're mostly dictated by how well your organization is structured and how technically competent your people are, which is why in the short term, you don't really get to have much of an effect on these. Okay, they might be high. You might incur high one-off costs at the beginning of a project, but if the project results in success and you amortize that cost over the lifetime of the project, it should ultimately represent a small portion of the entire budget involved in putting something into production and maintaining it. So anytime you are proposing an infrastructure change, you're going to experience one-off costs, and they can end up being high. Okay, these one-off costs are the primary reason that non-technical stakeholders are scared of infrastructure changes. If you're proposing an infrastructure change, it's going to be really important to make sure that these one-off costs are paid down by the savings brought through improved automation. If you're going to spend 2 years working on automating something that's going to save you 15 minutes a week, the numbers don't work out, and you're not going to be able to use this framework that I'm presenting. Okay, so first of all, you have to make sure that your argument is actually making sense, and this can help by carefully calculating these costs and stashing them away so that you can come back later to objectively show when a positive return on investment should be achieved. Okay, you're going to make your investment up front, and then over the course of some time, if the infrastructure changes are successful, you will pay down that initial investment. You have to make sure those numbers work. So it's really important to keep your one-off costs as low as possible and make sure that they're accurate. Okay, so if we are going to experience an ROI, where does it come from? It comes from savings in the other 3 categories of costs. Okay, so notice how one-off costs are actually only one category of cost. Simply communicating this fact can help non-technical stakeholders start to understand the situation better, because they might not even know that the rest of these exist. Okay, let's talk about monthly costs. Monthly costs are terrifying because they have no end in sight. They will always be there with you. I'm not going to go through this entire slide in detail here, but a way that you can open up this conversation is by creating an analogy, which is the difference between paying a seemingly high one-time flat rate for a software compared to something like a per seat per month subscription to a SaaS. Business people really understand this very, very well because it's one of the most important budgeting decisions that they make. So here's a little example. You can copy, paste, use, adapt however you would like. It's pretty simple, so we won't go through it step by step here. Okay. So let's look at these monthly costs now. So now that you've got the analogy set up with your non-technical stakeholder, it's time to get concrete on what these costs actually are in terms that could be understood by a non-technical stakeholder. Now, keep in mind, I'm providing you a framework here. Okay, this is not the final solution. Every single thing that I present here, you're going to have to modify a bit to make more relatable for your own institution. Okay, so we have manual work. When a technical worker cannot automate part of the job, they have to do manual work. This manual work is the death of the soul of anybody who works with code for a living. Plus, they interrupt your concentration. Even seemingly small 20-minute per week tasks can easily add up to a part-time job if you're not given the tools to automate them away. And before you know it, you multiply these costs across a team and they absolutely explode. And since people are usually your biggest cost, you should be able to calculate using your salary how much manual tasks are costing your company. We also have mechanical time. When a data scientist or a data engineer hits a button to process some data and train a model, it needs to be fast, because working in the data world is different than the application development world, because the operations themselves can take much longer and require more computing power. So it actually becomes really important for data processing operations to be fast. You might need more power in your development environment somehow. So your boss might think, well, look, if they're slow, then you can just work on something else in the meantime, right? Who cares if it takes 2 hours for a query to run? You've got plenty of other stuff to do. Go answer some emails or whatever. Okay, this is true to some extent, but it breaks down pretty quickly, because there is a difference between a maker schedule and a manager schedule. And a pure manager, if you have one of those, may not know the existence of this concept, which is that engineers and scientists require longer amounts of unbroken time to do their work. The longer you have to wait for something to run, the more it breaks your train of thought and the less you can iterate. Here is a visualization of a maker schedule versus a manager schedule. A manager schedule is a very asynchronous thing that is made up of a whole bunch of short tasks that are self-contained, don't really matter the order that you do them in. If they end up with 5 minutes or 10 minutes here or there, great, I go answer another email and you're doing your job. Whereas makers need long periods, preferably hours, 3 hours, 4 hours at a time of unbroken concentration in order to complete difficult tasks that require them to keep lots of context in their head. So again, bringing this fact, the existence of this difference between a maker schedule and a manager schedule, can help. Okay? We also have non-technical engineering hours. So no matter how technical of a worker you are, if you're working in industry, you're going to have meetings. Fact. Nobody will dispute this. One of the mantras of DevOps, and also thus MLOps, because it comes from DevOps, is self-service. The technical workers need to own their own deployments, because largely, when a technical worker owns their own deployments, they have less meetings with other teams to achieve the same outcome. This is good. The less MLOps you have, the more meetings you have. The more meetings you have, the less you can ship. And again, this is a framework, so you're going to need to find a way to make this relatable to your own organization, preferably with specific examples. Okay, we also have technical engineering hours, and this one innocent-looking section in the middle of the blog post is, and this talk, is what many people think is actually the entire job description. This is a question of how many technical tasks can a technical worker complete, given that they have an unbroken stream of time to work on. Okay, and it essentially boils down to the feature completeness of your infrastructure. The more features your infrastructure has that you need, the fewer things that your engineers or your scientists will have to develop themselves. For example, setting up and maintaining a Spark cluster in-house and on-prem can literally take months for the first time. it can also take entire like salaried people's jobs to maintain it. Whereas getting access to the same functionality through Databricks does not require an extra admin and could maybe be achieved, what might take months on-prem in-house could be achieved in an afternoon. This is an example. You should be able to come up with these examples with actual times. This feature will save us this much time. This much time translates to this much money. You always have to be making these connections. Okay, other types of recurring costs. This is something that is an uncomfortable one for many people, but we have to talk about it. And it is employee turnover. Okay, fact. The worse your tooling, the more employee turnover you have. Look, I do all of the hiring for their data. I speak to I interview hundreds of people that are at current jobs looking to move to a new one. And I can tell you, 80% of them say this: I'm working in an environment, the tools are 10 or 15 years old, there's no infrastructure update on the horizon, my career is going to take a hit if I stay here. The industry is going to keep moving forward. I'm going to stay right here. By the time I move on to my next job, I'm going to be behind. I'm going to be worth less money. So I better get ahead of it and do it now. Okay? Also, many technical workers are motivated purely by learning. Some are more outcome-oriented and just like to deliver. And in all of these cases, an absence of MLOps may cause your data scientists and your data engineers to become bored and frustrated with their lack of ability to ship in a modern way. Communicating the cost of employee turnover shouldn't be that difficult. There's plenty of estimates that you can find of people saying that, like, yeah, the cost of an employee turnover is something like 50% of a person's salary. If you have a spot that's open, you have to change that person out. The cost of that to the business through lost productivity, recruitment costs, HR costs, legal costs, training costs, all of these things, they can add up to a lot of money. So you don't need a lot of hits on this, one or two of these leaving your organization because of this, and your costs are, getting up in 6 figures per year easily. Okay, and depending on the culture of your organization, you only have a certain amount of control over turnover. Okay, technical workers don't quit their jobs just because they don't like the tooling. There's lots of other reasons why people quit. Let's not kid ourselves, but tooling is one element of control over employee turnover that you should retain because you can. Okay, we also have time to market opportunity costs. The longer a project sits in the pipeline, the higher your opportunity cost. If you're a large organization with many customers, a single machine learning model might represent 6 or 7 figures of yearly revenue. And there's a couple of factors that you should take into account with respect to your technical workers and shipping new products, which is how long does it take to develop and release a model or an ETL? And how many projects can a single technical worker maintain in production? So number 1 is pretty obvious, but 2 generally gets less consideration. There's a lot of focus on how quickly can we get this model out the door. There's less focus on, okay, after we ship all of these models, how long until our engineers or our scientists are spending all of their time on maintenance? Okay, so each time a model or a dashboard gets put in production, everything that went into creating it has to be maintained. The models have to be retrained. The ETLs have to be rerun, maybe hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. And the less MLOps you have, the more time your technical worker must spend executing manual tasks that they should be able to automate. So we pretty regularly find that improved tooling can literally double or more the number of projects that a single technical worker can maintain in production. So yeah, you can pretty much double your ROI on technical people's salaries with the right tooling. So even if you have a couple of months, 3 or 6 months of, an infrastructure overhaul, this time to market opportunity cost can really add up really quickly. Okay, so let's say that you've made all these arguments. Okay, what's the ask now? Okay, so we're going to talk about the types of tech that you should advocate for. So you've made your successful case. They're like, okay, I understand that the way we're doing things is not the right way, blah, blah, blah. Tell me what you want now. Okay, if you get to this point, you're doing really, really good. But you're still not done. Okay, so they're going to need to sign off on a plan that's going to have some costs. Okay, so you will need to pick your battles very, very, very carefully. You do not want to ask this very, very stressed decision maker that's under a lot of pressure for a single thing that is not necessary. Because if you do, they sign off on it and it comes back to bite them in the ass in the future. It's going to be rough times for everybody, including you. Okay, so the following slides are the types of tech that you'll need to ask for and why. And the reason why we're focusing on the types of tech and not specifically the tech itself is because there's multiple tools in each category that can achieve the same effect. And giving yourself and your non-technical stakeholder some flexibility in these areas will show goodwill when increasing the chances that you find the right stack without being too dogmatic. And your non-technical stakeholder is going to be very, very, very happy when something happens like, oh, legal department says you can't use this. Okay, cool. Here's another alternative. Rather than being like, no, we must use airflow, otherwise I'm out, right? So let's focus on the attributes of the tools that we need to advocate for to give you the most flexibility possible to increase the chances that you end up in success. All right, so a Linux command line. There's lots of different types of Linux command lines, okay? And every single thing that you do must be runnable via a command, okay? A command is a string of characters that represents a button you can push. Every button that you push on a computer should have a corresponding command. If it does not have a corresponding command, it means you're locked into something called a graphical user interface, a GUI. And a GUI requires a human operating a mouse to click it and run it. If something requires a human clicking a mouse to run it, you will never be able to automate it away. You will always have a human in the loop. Even if they only need to show up for that 1 second to click that one button, it means that that thing cannot be done without a person sitting in front of a computer. Okay, so if you can run something as a command, it can be included in something called a CI/CD pipeline, which are the primary method of automation in the world of DevOps and MLOps. So command lines available in a Linux or Unix environment, they're the most feature complete, well-studied, and robust. So this is what their data and I recommend. If you're a Windows shop, this task is made quite a bit more difficult, but these days PowerShell is starting to get a little bit better, so at least there's some kind of path. If you're stuck in a Windows environment, you might not be able to automate everything away, but you should be able to do enough to make a dent in your costs. Okay, you need model and data versioning, and the reason I'm including this here is, if they have application developers, they might already be familiar with code versioning or something like that because they're application developers or you are already using it, but they might not be familiar with this concept of model and data versioning. And because unlike most other things in MLOps, this one does not have a direct parallel in traditional DevOps. Okay, this is because data and models have different characteristics than anything else in the application world because of their size and their nature. Okay, so there's one set of tools that you use to track versions of your code, but then you need a different set of tools to track versions of your data and model. Okay, this is the kind of phrase that you're going to need to try and get across of like, no, I can't just use Git for this. I really, really, really need this other thing. Tools like MLflow, DVC, GitHub LFS can tackle this, but the important part is that you have model and data versioning. Okay, so you need automation, ETL automation and scheduling. This is because with ETLs, there's just so many things that can go wrong. And the more things that can go wrong during running an ETL, the more time you need to spend manual work to fix it. And then before you know it, you're spending all of your time putting out fires without knowing that you have descended into complete madness. Oh yeah, João Fonseca also says that Windows subsystem for Linux can help with that too. That is, maybe we should come back to that later. but it depends on what your production environment is. If they allow you to release things in Linux, then WSL can help. Okay, so you can't just run a complex ETL on a simple schedule like a cron, or maybe even manually running it every once in a while or something. No, you need to have it retry if something goes wrong. You need to have organized logs and access to it to debug it, preferably via a web interface. You need to coordinate data flow between multiple systems with arbitrary triggers. You need workflows to depend on others. And you might need to perform arbitrary logic in the middle of it, which requires the flexibility of an open source programming language. So there's more than enough needs that tools such as DigDag or Airflow are absolutely essential. Without it, you significantly increase the maintenance hours of a deployment, which results in soul-destroying manual tasks that we keep coming back to over and over again. Okay, so we also need CI/CD pipelines. What we're trying to achieve at the end of the day here is for your technical workers to push new code to a repo, have it automatically checked for errors, and deployed to production. CI/CD pipelines are how you do this. We recommend using GitLab for your code versioning as well as your CI/CD, since it was built from day one with DevOps in mind. And you can have your runners, your runners can be on arbitrary machines that you control. So the flexibility is enough that you can be dealing with big data sets without having to worry about, Travis CI or Circle CI completely murdering you in costs. Okay, so now we've got a framework for how to have this discussion, and we need to now make it real somehow. Okay, so there's a spreadsheet that you can link to from here that you can use for inspiration. You can use as inspiration for putting this into real numbers for your non-technical stakeholders. Okay, now this is not ready. This is not out of the box. You shouldn't expect to open up this spreadsheet and then immediately start plugging things in, because each environment, each institution, it's different enough that you're going to need to modify this. Okay, but the core idea is that you should be able to take each one of these categories of tasks and costs, put them into a spreadsheet, and calculate them. Okay, and the end goal is going to be to accurately simulate how much you should be able to scale your team by having an infrastructure overhaul. Okay, and this is the thing that you want to focus on right here. Okay, is over the course of maybe a year or a year and a half, as you're growing out your team, you should be able to say, like, okay, how long is it going to take for me to release a project? Right? Better tooling might result in faster project release times. If you can release a project in 2 months instead of 3 months, that's an extra project per year. That's pretty big. Okay. You also have the amount of time that it requires to maintain in maybe hours per month, for example, a particular deployment. And before long, after you've released a certain number of projects, your a single person's ability to work on a new project, it's going to flip from, yeah, I have availability to work on something new, to no, I don't. Okay? And you should be able to show this with real numbers. If you can't show this with real numbers and you cannot convince at least yourself of this, you don't have a case in the first place anyways. Okay? So you need to get as close as possible to being able to say, if we do these changes, we'll be able to have 4 projects per year instead of 3, and a single person will be able to continuously release new projects throughout the entire year before they go into complete pure maintenance mode. Okay, so that's all I got. I think we can go question time now.
Yes, we can. Thank you so much, Sam. I think it was a really interesting presentation. I want to ask you, if before going into questions, if you want to comment on João Fonseca's comments regarding Windows subsystem for Linux too.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I felt there was something in there.
Yeah, so, okay, so if you're a Windows shop, then that means your production environment is Windows. Okay, and even if on your own machines you are allowed to run Windows subsystem for Linux, it's not necessarily going to mean that you can use it on your in your production environment. So even though you might be able to use it locally, convincing somebody to allow you to use Windows subsystems for Linux to actually deploy things might not work. So it exists, and if your deployment environment is a Linux environment, but you prefer to work in Windows on your own machine, Windows subsystem for Linux, it can really help a lot, because then you can have all of your productivity tools in your Windows environment, but then you can be running Linux commands, which is more similar to your production environment. But it won't work the other way around, though.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. So let's jump into questions. I want to remind everyone that is on YouTube to do not forget to post your questions on the chat. And we are going to start with one that it's actually mine. I'm going to be honest. So, like, in your experience, what were the main concerns that the non-technical stakeholders usually raise besides of the costs?
It's besides the costs, it's roadmaps. It's sacrificing a roadmap. It's going to require, there's no version, even if you were to bring like an outside consulting team in order to overhaul some infrastructure, it's still going to require time from your in-house people. And any amount of time that you take from your in-house people is going to then reduce the velocity that they have available, or the energy that they have available for their current tasks. So it's they might say like, okay, sure, if we do this thing and we do this, then in 6 months from now everything's going to be fine, unicorns and rainbows and candy, and we're all going to be happily prancing through the fields, but right now I have a roadmap, and if I miss this deadline for this first quarter, I'm going to lose my job or something like that, or I can't afford to miss this one deliverable. And there's really no formula for that one. You have to figure out a way to meet those deliverables while still overhauling your infrastructure. And that just what that might mean is that the infrastructure overhaul just takes way longer. But at least in the meantime, people that are 2 or 3 levels up the chain are not going to get upset because you're missing deadlines, right? So if you stopped everything and did your entire infrastructure change, you might be able to do it in like 2 months or 3 months or something. But then you've wasted an entire quarter of your roadmap. If instead of doing it in 2 or 3 months, you're able to do it in 1 year, but you only miss a couple of minor deliverables instead, that's the kind of trade-off that they might be more willing to make.
Thank you for that. then I'm going to be I'm sorry for pushing on this, because it's something that I believe every technical person already came up and had issues with it. And like, how should we react if the planning was not successful at first? Like, how should we adapt and show there are still advantages? Because you mentioned roadmap, and sometimes you're failing to be able to fulfill your roadmap and deliver on time. And then those stakeholders are like, okay, so this is not as good as you were mentioning before.
Man, look, if you make a recommendation and you're wrong, you're just wrong. There isn't you can't really recover from that. You can mitigate it by having contingency plans, by saying like, okay, look, if every single thing I'm saying is wrong, here's how we recover, right?
Mhm.
Like like what we're going to leave the old environment running with the new environment in parallel, for example, so that if the new environment is not working, or we find out 1 month after we deploy that it doesn't work that well or something like that, then at least we can roll back to the other one, and then you will have to eat the costs of all that infrastructure change that maybe didn't work, but then at least you didn't miss anything on your roadmap. But really, at the end of the day, if your planning is not successful, it means that you probably weren't qualified to be doing that planning in the first place. That means you were just wrong. And if you make a big recommendation to your boss and then you push for it really, really hard, and then that recommendation turns out to be wrong, there isn't really much coming back from that. There just isn't.
That's true. Thank you for that. I think that was really but it is true, because it's like, even though in the future it try to come up with other new ideas, they are still like, okay, but the first one was not as good as we thought it would be. So what is different right now? And I think it's a way that sometimes it's hard to come back and be able to innovate and came up with new ideas without having all of the knowledge prior to be able to do them and implement them and go with them until the end.
Yeah, it's tough, like, I think a lot of my role as a consultant, so I'm outside of the teams. I'm a consultant.
Yeah.
A large part of my role is to say, hey, I believe this is the right thing to do. I have a business based upon the idea that I'm good at making these plans and these decisions. And I am willing to stake my professional reputation on the validity of these recommendations. And if they turn out to be wrong, I take responsibility. And I say that up front, using those exact words, which then is like, okay, the internal people now have politically now have a way to be able to survive for the next fight.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think every dev people and us that are building things need to have a careful mindset when explaining things to stakeholders, because we can't be overly excited with the concept, but we still also need to share like, okay, so this is going to take time and we'll still need time. And if we are not entirely sure about the process and about all of the steps, we need to like, okay, I don't guarantee and say, I don't have all the knowledge for this. I want to build it, but I still need time to investigate and be able to build my background first, and then being able to work on the project that we have.
Yeah, and getting outside opinions can help with that, because look, at the end of the day, you might be wrong. There might be some details somewhere in there that you're not considering, and you might be wrong, and you should be humble enough to know that. And if you seek outside counsel, from other people who are more experienced, with a very small amount of their time, they can spot some of those big errors in your assumptions. Okay, but if you have those, okay, so this framework and this spreadsheet and everything that's been presented, one of the main values that this kind of framework brings is laying out your assumptions as clearly as possible. If you think that your 2 hours per week that you spend running ETLs is now going to go down to 10 minutes per week because you introduced this and you have it explained in a document and on a line item in a spreadsheet, somebody who's more experienced, it's not just somebody who's listening in a meeting and then giving some feedback. Somebody who's more experienced can look at this and be like, oh, I'm sorry. You're never going to get this 2-hour task down to a 10-minute task. That's just impossible. So by framing your arguments in terms of numbers, it forces you to make assumptions and put those assumptions on paper. And when you have those clearly stated assumptions on paper with numbers assigned to them, it makes it easier to find the ones that are wrong.
No, yeah, that's totally true. Thank you for that. Paulo, do you want to jump in?
I don't have any questions. I can insist for the people who are currently watching this video. You can ask question in YouTube chat, please.
Oh, we have a question. What time zone is this meeting in? We're in Portugal.
Portugal?
GMT time zone.
GMT plus 0.
Either way, guys, if you don't have any questions right now, maybe Sam can stay a little bit further with us during the networking and you can join there and see and answer all of the doubts that you possibly have.
Okay, sounds good.
It's okay. Once again, thank you, Sam. Thank you very much for this. I think it was really, really a really exciting presentation, actually. I think where probably the most technical people are focused on what we should be doing technically and not so much on how we should presenting the information and being able to convince our stakeholders about what should be doing next instead of only having the technical or product roadmap sometimes. But thank you for that.
Sure thing. My pleasure.
And
I think we can finish.
yeah. So going then into our final slides. So don't forget to get into our call for proposals. We are really eager to hear more from you guys and know what you're about to say and know your next project or what you've been working during this time. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for being there and participating in all of our webinars. So do not forget, we're going to have a networking session in the Google Meet. So join us. See ya.
Data science has been becoming a growing profession and is also the heart of many organizations. That's why Data Science Portugal was born. The first community created by data scientists for data scientists. DSPT wants to gather anyone who works in the field and chat about any topic over this great subject. All members from our team are committed to make sure that the data science field evolves in a healthier and stronger way. To ensure that the focus is on sharing knowledge, we guarantee that our stage is not a place that supports any commercial or recruitment content, and our kind speakers are committed to share their experience for free. We want you. Let's do bigger things together. Join us at any event all around Portugal or online.